The St. Louis Cardinals are facing their first notable injury scare of the spring. We'll tell you the latest on Jordan Walker after he left Tuesday's game early. What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of b-schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you. It is Tuesday evening, March the 4th, 2025. Today, the Cardinals had a split squad, so 2 games in one day. Both were televised, which was pretty cool for the fans back home, getting a chance to watch 2 games at once. I have 2 TVs in the basement. I had both TVs going at the same time, and it was honestly a lot of fun. Kind of just reminds you of when you get into the regular season and there's good baseball going on the MLB TV at multiple hours of the day, and you're watching multiple games. I love having that dual setup, by the way, in the basement. But this was all Cardinals baseball, and the Cardinals had, a pretty good day on the scoreboard. They beat the Mets 6-1 at Jupiter in the Roger Dean Stadium game. And they beat the Washington Nationals down in West Palm Beach 6-4. One of the very young prospects in the organization, Yordaline Pena, hit a massive home run in terms of distance and in terms of importance in the game in West Palm Beach at the ballpark of the Palm Beaches as the Cardinals won that 6-4. I believe that was the 2-run shot in the 9th inning that put the Cardinals ahead, and that ended up being the finals. So the record for the spring up to 4-6 for the Cardinals when you bank 2 wins in one day. So that was kind of a cool moment from that game. From a pitching perspective, things are still looking pretty bright for a number of Cardinals. McGreevy was solid in 3 innings of work. Matthew Liberatore continues to look really good. I think there's got to be a conversation. As much as it seems very obvious to just put him into a bullpen role, it's where Matthew Liberatore thrived the most last year when he really kind of got settled in. I know the Cardinals have kind of pushed him back and forth between roles for the last few years. But last year, it really seemed like he got a groove going when he was in the bullpen role. But my goodness, it was 3 innings today, and I say you continue to stretch him out and see what he's capable of doing, because if he still looks like this over the course of 5 innings, 6 innings at a time, I know that's not in the plans, and maybe the Cardinals do something drastic like trade somebody, where I haven't really advocated for that. I've said kind of keep Eric Fetty, hold him, to see what he's capable of, and if he's doing a good job for you and you're not contending, trade him at the deadline if you want to. But for right now, it's better to have more good pitchers than fewer good pitchers. But, man, that was with the mindset being that Matthew Liberatore would end up being in the bullpen. And that's still probably where the Cardinals kind of see for him. But I really like what we're seeing from Libby so far. And I would continue to give him opportunities to stretch out and see what that looks like. Because if he can finally lock in with the mentality needed to be a bulldog on the mound for 6 innings at a time and do it consistently every 5 days, that ends up being one of the better starters in baseball. Like, I still think Matthew Liberatore has that within him. Kind of had resigned myself to the idea that it would be bullpen role for him right now, but you never know. I say continue to run him out there if he continues to pick up the mantle the way he has done so far. So that's one of the conversations going on. The Cardinals also had some pretty good starting pitching from Andre Pallante in the game against the Mets. Ryan Helsley came in, had some of the mainstay bullpen guys look pretty good in that one. Helsley, Fernandez, and Leahy came in. Leahy's still stretching out a little bit. They gave him multiple innings of work, as did the Cardinals with Tink Hence in that game against the Mets. And by then, you're seeing kind of the lower portion, certainly, of the Mets lineup rather than some of the stars that would remain into the game. And, of course, the Cardinals were split up between 2 squads anyway. But Tink Hence had a couple of scoreless innings in this one. I should say unearned run he did allow. So not technically a scoreless appearance for Tink Hence, but he didn't allow an earned run. Gave up some base runners for sure and just kind of continuing to get the work in. But good to see, I think, a positive outing for Tink Hence there. No doubt about that. And Matt Koperniak hit a home run in that game against the Mets that was played at Roger Dean Stadium, which could end up being more relevant than we prefer if the injury to Jordan Walker is anything serious. The Cardinals had to pull Jordan Walker from the game in West Palm Beach after taking just 1 at bat. And if you trace it back, there was a play in the bottom of the 2nd inning where Jordan Walker, playing defensively in right field, tracking a fly ball, he ends up making the catch, throwing the ball back into the infield with very little fanfare. And you kind of think, okay, what's the big deal? You watch the video, though, and there is something that looks a little bit awkward about it. As he's kind of jogging after the ball, if his cleat maybe sticks in the turf a little bit, I say turf, into the grass, and he was kind of digging into the grass afterward. It looked like with his right cleat, maybe there was a spot where he, kind of caught or something, and the cleat kind of, if it catches and it doesn't really respond how you expect it to with your gait and your stride, then you maybe kind of look down and go, man, what was going on with that? He ended up playing, I believe, the rest of the inning, but did not come back out for the Cardinals in the bottom of the third, it was the case in the top of the third that his position to bat was on deck. And even in that moment, Brian Torres was there in the on-deck circle, was going to bat for him. Ended up not having to do that, but he does end up, I think he went in as a defensive replacement for the third inning. I'll try to check the box score on that to confirm, but he certainly did not, Jordan Walker did not come back into the game offensively there when the spot in the order came up. Yeah, bottom of the third inning, defensive replacement, Walker leaves the game. So basically, he catches the second out of the bottom of the second. He stays out there for the third out as far as I can tell. Yeah, that is what happened. And that was a strike swinging, so he didn't have to do anything in right field defensively for that third out of the second. And then he was done for the day. And the Cardinals turned it as a left knee pain, I believe was the phraseology, which normally you'll hear discomfort, contusion, like there are a number of phrases that you're accustomed to hearing. This one was just left knee pain, if I'm not mistaken, for Jordan Walker, which is like not what you want, obviously. The situation for one of the key Cardinals that the team is certainly looking to get as much opportunity as he can possibly handle this year. And yeah, just checking my text right now from Cardinals PR, I can read you the exact text. Outfielder Jordan Walker was removed in the third inning of the Cardinals game today in West Palm Beach after experiencing left knee pain, and then added he will undergo further evaluation, which is, of course, what they will say because he will. Even if he comes out of the game and it's very much a nothing burger, still going to continue to be evaluated. But does that mean he'll get some imaging? Is there some concern of an issue there in the knee? Gosh, you hope not, because that would be a heck of a way to have that happen. Just a very nonchalant fly ball to right field in a spring game before you even get out of the early stages of March. Jordan Walker, like, you can look at this a number of ways. It's a huge summer for Jordan Walker in terms of his development and seeing what he's capable of doing if it's taking that next step at the big league level. But also for those who are hoping to see the St. Louis Cardinals end up with a competitive season, I think Jordan Walker would end up having to play a pretty big part of that as well, because he is part of that group that last year didn't perform as well offensively, was sent down to the minors for a portion of the season. And if you look at the potential for his numbers to improve, if you get him anything close to what he was a season prior to last one, 2023, his first season, had a 787 OPS. You get Jordan Walker from I think he ended up being more like a 619 OPS or something last year. You get him back to 750. Not even as good as he was in his rookie year. 750 on the OPS, and the Cardinals lineup is going to look a lot different because he's usually batting in the lower third of it in most cases. And you could take that from, 610 OPS like he had last year essentially to being a really productive guy at 750 or above in the OPS category would make a huge difference for the Cardinals. Like, he's in that category with Nolan Gorman, who was at a 671 OPS last year, a year after having an 800-plus OPS for the Cardinals. So Gorman is in that category too, where if you look at the positions around the diamond, let's start in the outfield. Lars Nootbaar played a lot last year. He would play more if he could stay healthy, but his numbers are still pretty solid when he's out there. Center field, we'll see what that ends up looking like. And yeah, I still got this alignment in my head because I do think there's a chance that either Michael Ciani holds off this notion that Lars Nootbaar should be playing center field, or Victor Scott II is just able to maybe win that center field job, and you can hopefully get him as another example of a player who had an OPS in the 500s last year, and if he could turn into an offensive force for the Cardinals, in addition to what he can bring defensively and on the base paths, then Victor Scott ends up being a guy who was a kind of a zero last year offensively for you, and if suddenly he's a league average player, my goodness, the bottom third of your lineup ends up really taking a boost. So if Nootbaar just can be healthy, if Victor Scott can take that center field job and run with it, and I know we're going to add a lot of ifs into this conversation, but if Jordan Walker, as we move from left to right, can improve just anything close to what he gave you in 2023 when he was really productive as a rookie, along the infield, Wilson Contreras just do the same thing he did last year. Brendan Donovan do the same thing he did last year. Mason Wynn do the same thing he did last year. Ideally, he'll get a little bit better as he kind of gets more integrated. The numbers trailed off a little bit for him at the end, as they did for Alec Burleson. But I've got Burleson right now basically on the bench. He's going to play virtually every day against righties. But just for the sake of this exercise, we're continuing to work our way. We're kind of doing this in a weird snake format. I started in left field, and I'm working my way toward catcher. But third base, Arenado, look, I mean, if he is what he was last year, okay, that's a team that got 83 wins with Arenado performing the way that he did last year. in any sense of justice in the world, you're going to see Nolan Arenado perform better than he did last year. And then you get to the catcher position. Ivan Herrera had an 800 OPS. Pedro Paz has an OPS in the 600s. If those guys are similar offensively to what they were last year, and then you go to the DH position, Gorman is another one of those guys. Should theoretically be better than he was last year, but even if he's just about the same, where he was massively disappointing, again, that team won 83 games last year. So you're kind of, and Alec Burleson is a guy that I think will be first man in, and maybe this is the injury that gets him in. Speaking of the Jordan Walker situation, if it's anything serious, then you'll end up having a different alignment out there. And the way that you come about that is, I mean, you could go a variety of ways. You could put Nootbaar in right field, Donovan in left, Gorman at second, and then Burleson would be your DH on any given day. That seems like a reasonable way to go about it. But if that injury is serious to Jordan Walker, that's really the scenario that we're talking about. Hopefully that's not the case. But my point with all of this is to say, like, Jordan is one of the few guys where I basically said across the majority of the infield, if they kind of just do what they did last year, if the catchers do what they did last year, if Nootbaar does what he did last year but plays more because he's more durable, and then so like those are the little caveats. It's left fielder, produce the same but play more often because he doesn't get hurt. Your center fielder, you do need improved production from there, but I think we have a lot of reason to believe that Victor Scott II can provide that now, another year under his belt. And Jordan Walker and Gorman, those are really the three guys. And I even said leave Arenado alone. He's probably going to be better than he was, but even if he's not, I'm trying to suspend my disbelief on like how possible is it that this Cardinals team could be better than the 83 wins that they just had. I think it's those spots offensively that you'd be talking about. And then on the pitching side, certainly I think there is some question when you lose Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson like they have. But you also have to remember they didn't have Eric Fetty in the rotation at the beginning of last year, or even like him and Lynn were hardly in the rotation at the same time. Fetty was brought in and Lynn was almost immediately put onto the injured list. So it's basically fair to say Fetty replaces Lynn relative to what last year's team gave you. And Fetty performed better than Lynn statistically last year, whether it was with the White Sox or with the Cardinals in his time there at the end of the season. So that's not an area that I think there should be considerable drop-off. Palante was another guy that was not in the beginning of the season rotation, and he's in it now, was in it for the majority of the year, but you can kind of honestly put Palante into the slot, into the rotation of Gibson, if you wanted to do that and sort of categorize it mentally in that way. Sonny Gray in the Sonny Gray spot. Miles Michaelis in the Miles Michaelis spot. If he's worse than a 5.35 ERA, I have news for you. I don't think he makes it to June with this team. So like, they'll cut him at that point because he's in the final year of a contract. There's just nothing to be gained from keeping Miles Michaelis around if he's really struggling to the extent that he did last year and you're 2 months into the season. Cut ties and bring up one of the guys from AAA. Do you have infinite faith that the Cardinals will operate that way? Not necessarily, because historically they've usually waited a month or two too long to get rid of players that are not producing when their veteran status is in play. But I do think if you're going to claim to be turning over a new leaf and to be in a mode of transition this year, and if the team is not, this should be the case whether the team is good or bad when you get to June 1st or mid-May or whatever that Labor Day, not Labor, but Memorial Day weekend. Like, you just pick your poison. The Cardinals could be a good team and Michaelis could be a 5.5 ERA. Well, in that case, he's holding them back. And if they're competitive, you shouldn't continue to put up with that. And if the Cardinals are a bad team and Miles Michaelis is a 5.5 ERA, then you should look at that and say, well, there's really no reason to keep him around because we're trying to find out what we have for the future. I hate that in my hypothetical scenarios, I continue to pick on Miles Michaelis. He's just one of the few guys for which the contract situation dictates that this is a distinct possibility. If you ask me for my prediction, just so people say, wow, you're really negative about Michaelis. No, I really just like to lay out the roster machinations and what could come to fruition if certain scenarios played out. That's not a prediction that a given scenario will play out. And if I had to predict it, if you gave me 4.99 over-under Miles Michaelis ERA, I would take the under. I would say that he finds a way to improve upon what he did last year, and he's probably straddling that line in the 4.7 range for ERA. That makes the Cardinals question, like, is this productive for the team? Do we keep with this? Do we decide to jettison him? Is there any reason to consider trading him to a place like the Marlins, whereas maybe the one place he'd be willing to go? Like, there's a lot of aspects of that I think if he's in that 4.5 to 4.75 range, the Cardinals go, man, we're probably going to keep kicking this can down the road, even though that may not be the most conducive thing to get you where you want to be in terms of a transition year. And then for Steven Matz, it's a question of what's the productivity in the rotation? Is there another avenue where you move into the bullpen? I just don't think Miles Michaelis in the bullpen is a step that would ever make sense, even if he's struggling in the rotation. I think that's the point at which you just cut ties with him if push came to shove. With Matz, I think we have seen examples in the past over the course of this contract where he has been able to produce in the bullpen in various roles, and so maybe you consider that if he's struggling in the rotation and you're just looking to kind of figure out what to do with him for the time being. Or he's another guy that you could potentially, jettison from the organization if the numbers aren't there. But again, I'm not predicting that him or Michaelis is going to struggle. I just think that, they've struggled in past years, and if it happens again, if you just carbon copy their numbers from last year to this first 2 months of this season, I think the Cardinals would end up looking at those 5 ERAs a little bit differently given the circumstances of this supposed transition year. But my point with all of this is, there's a few areas where, and what did I say? I said Sonny Gray, Palante Fetty kind of sliding in for the Lynn and Gibson contingent, and then Michaelis and Matz are there. Both of them kind of were there last year, but, those were guys that were maybe dragging down your rotation a little bit when they were out there in terms of the performance because both had an ERA above 5. So if that ends up being the case, for them to get better would not be a particularly far cry. That could certainly happen. The only area that I look at this team and say reasonably I think it's going to be worse on paper than it was last year going into the season is the bullpen, just because you lose the productivity of Andrew Kittredge. But what if you gain a healthy Riley O'Brien, which you hardly had at all last year, and he ends up looking like a guy? Matthew Liberatore, full season of him locked into a potential bullpen role where he's able to elevate into the 7th, 8th, and maybe even 9th inning given a various circumstance of your week throughout the Major League Baseball season. Maybe that's something that actually makes the bullpen more productive than we're thinking on paper it is going into the year. There's some guys that could be in that bullpen mix that actually helps it to be a pretty solid group. You still have Helsley, you still have JoJo, you still have Ryan Fernandez, and we'll see on Nick Anderson. That's another kind of piece of information from the games on Tuesday. He didn't look good. I'm not going to mince words. It was an ugly outing for him. Recorded just 1 out, gave up 4 earned runs. He walked 2. So, you're not in the strike zone, and when you are in the strike zone, you're giving up 3 hits while recording just 1 out. And he was getting hit hard, too. So, a combination of kind of all over the place in the strike zone, walking a couple of batters, and then when you do throw strikes, they're starting to pound you. It looked objectively bad for Nick Anderson. But this is a spring game, and so you kind of take it with a grain of salt. However, he's got to have some better spring games, in my opinion, before the Cardinals can take the time and the trouble to actually manipulate the roster in such a way that gets him on the team. Because remember, he is on a minor league deal right now. He'll make just over $1 million in salary if the Cardinals elect to put him on the opening day roster. And if they don't decide that he's worthy of the opening day roster, which also means a 40-man roster spot, so that's what I mean by manipulate the roster, you've actually got to do something actively rather than just passively, well, he's on the team, so we put him on the team. No, you'd actually have to take somebody else off or put somebody on the 60-day injured list if you're saying Nick Anderson's good enough to make this team. Right now, he's got a 19.29 ERA in the spring games which again, I think has been very minimal opportunity that we've really seen of him so far. But coming into the spring, my stance on it was if he's healthy, he'll probably be in the mix. He'll probably be on the team. But I think he might have to do a little bit more than demonstrate health. He had a 1 run allowed in his first spring outing against the Mets back on the 24th. He had a game against Miami on the 27th of February where he pitched a scoreless inning but gave up 2 hits. And then this one today was by far his worst outing of the spring, giving up 4 earned runs. Again, you're walking guys, you're giving up loud contact, kind of getting hit all over the yard in some of the base hits that he surrendered. So not the signs you want to see at this point from Anderson. We'll see if this is anything that materializes or if, again, it's just a little bit of a unique situation because he's a veteran pitcher with a lot of big league experience, but not on a big league contract. And I kind of thought he would be somebody that they would desire to see maybe fill that Andrew Kittredge role within the Cardinal bullpen this year, but not off to the start that you'd want to see to be able to comfortably do that with this player. So we'll see what that ends up looking like. But long story short, long story long, I suppose at this point, 20 minutes into the podcast, I think the bullpen is the only area that even on paper, and maybe I'm wrong, tell me the rotation is going to be worse than it was last year, which it wasn't great last year, and yet the Cardinals won 83 games. The offense, 22nd in runs scored, wasn't great last year. I find it hard to believe that it's going to be worse because you subtracted Goldschmidt. Well, that's a lot in theory, but it's not a lot in production. He had a 719 OPS. He was not productive last year. So you really didn't lose a lot. You got to keep guys healthy for sure, and those guys are going to have to produce to the level they did last year and then a little bit more. But I guess maybe we shouldn't overlook the idea of the bullpen and the Cardinals' performance in close games. And going to reiterate, Oliver Marmol's management of that bullpen I thought was sterling last year. I think he got the most out of this team to have it win 83 games. And if you look at the run differential, which I do believe finished up the season in a negative fashion, that would be indicative of the fact that Ollie Marmol probably did a pretty good job with this team last year. When you have a negative run differential, you finish outside the top 20 in starting rotation ERA, outside the top 20 in runs scored. It's like at the end of the day, well, what did you do well? Well, you didn't. You won games. I mean, they won 83 games, and you wouldn't really feel that way following the team the way that all of us did and kind of talking about them because they fell short of expectations. When you go and add a bunch of veterans to the mix, you do that in hopes of making the playoffs, making that leap back into October. And when you ultimately are unsuccessful in doing that, it's okay to be disappointed in the way the season went. But yeah, they were a minus 47 in the run differential last year, despite finishing tied for second in the Central with an 83-win season. And the Brewers won 90-some-odd games. They're pretty much a similar team compared to what they were last year. I know they did trade away Devin Williams, but they didn't have him for most of the first half anyway, and due to injury, and so he came back later in the season. The Cubs won 83 games, and I don't think it's a stretch to say the Cubs are going to be better this year than they were last year because they added Kyle Tucker, and they made a couple of other ancillary moves, and I think their young pitching group that they've kind of been ushering along is even a little bit closer to being ready to emerge. Same thing can be said of the Cincinnati Reds, who won 77 games last year. I certainly think that they're going to be a more competitive team than they were. And the Pirates should also be better than they were, although they did win 76 games. And like if they're the worst team of the division again with 76 wins, like that's not a terrible ball club. And so there's like an interesting kind of jostling for position that's going to be going on in the Central, which is no longer like, I don't think you can say anymore, oh, this is one of the league's worst divisions. It's such a terrible division. It was above 500 last year overall. I mean, you had the Brewers won 93 games, which put them, quick math, 24 games above 500. Cardinals and Cubs are both 4 games above 500, so that's a plus 32 for the division. The Pirates were a minus 20. Or pardon me, no, the Pirates were just a minus 10, and the Reds were a minus 8. So you're a plus 14 as a division. They were a division finishing above 500 last year. I wonder across the game. The Marlins lost 100 games, so they really dragged down the NL East. The Nationals were 71 and 91, but the other 3 teams in the East all were 89 or better in terms of win totals. So that ended up being, I think, a plus division as well. How the hell did this happen? I'm looking through and going, where were the bad divisions in baseball last year? Really, the AL West was dragging everybody down. Even the AL Central had a bunch of winning teams, but the Chicago White Sox were a minus 80 by themselves, which made that a pretty handily minus division. That's unbelievable. You had 4 teams in the AL Central. I know this is kind of turning into a hodgepodge podcast, but you had 4 teams in the AL Central last year above 500, and the White Sox were 80 games below 500, single-handedly contributing to the division being a sub-500 division when you add up all their records, because the Guardians were plus 23, Royals and Tigers plus 10, that's 43, Twins plus 2, that's 45. The White Sox basically turned every other division in baseball into like good, because anytime they played anybody from your division, they got their butts kicked. Although I think the Cardinals did lose game or maybe 2 to them. I can't remember. It wasn't a sweep. I remember that pretty clearly. But anyway, long story short, I think the Central is going to be kind of competitive this year, and the teams that are like at the bottom didn't lose 90 games last year, and so they could conceivably see their young talent rise them up even further. So that's where it could be a little bit difficult. You could maybe have better statistical numbers. The Cardinals could go from 22nd in runs scored to 15th. They could go from 24th or whatever they were in starters ERA to 15th, and they still might not win any additional games even if they pulled that off, because they outperformed what you would have expected. Like their Pythagorean, I think their expected win-loss record based on, this is just based on runs scored, runs allowed, so run differential, was 76 and 86. So they outperformed, and I don't know where they come up with that. I'm just looking at it on MLB.com, getting ahead of myself. But the Cardinals certainly outperformed based on their expected win-loss record last year. So all of this is to say you don't want to have too many injuries that happen early in camp, and the Jordan Walker one is one that would hurt if this is the case, because not only would I think you lose the production that he could hopefully provide as one of the few areas on the roster that you say, actually, that does need to be better if the Cardinals are going to improve. Everywhere else, you can kind of say it stays the same. I would say like 18 of the 25 spots, if it just stays the same, you would probably be, or was it 26-man roster now? you would probably be able to say the Cardinals are in the mix to be at least 500 or better. And then if you get a little bit better than that, you're in the playoff mix. Walker's spot is undoubtedly one of the spots that needs to be better than it was last year. And you may not have him if he's injured. It could be nothing. Let me paint a couple of different scenarios for what happened with this knee. And I wish we knew more information now, but because we don't, and it's bedtime on Tuesday, I'm just going to baselessly speculate because I don't have inside information on this. But just seeing the way that it played out, a little bit awkward, finishes the inning defensively. He comes in. Let's say the coaches or the manager, whoever was on the bench, pointed it out and said, hey, Jordan didn't look super comfortable catching that ball. We need to talk to him. And they talk to him and they say, hey, man, you good? What happened there? He said, I don't know. My cleat kind of caught. Are you feeling okay? Well, my knee's a little balky. Okay, let's just get you out of there and we'll get it looked at. It could have been that exact scenario, which if that's the case, could very easily just be nothing. Super duper precautionary. Or it could be a case where Jordan, nobody in the dugout really notices because the broadcast didn't really notice and it wasn't anything too substantial. We only knew kind of looking back at it that it was something. Tom Ackerman on the FanDuel broadcast had said, well, we didn't see anything obvious that had happened, and that's true. But if you were looking really closely, knowing what to look for, you go, okay, that was a little bit awkward there with Jordan. What happened there? And if that ends up being the case, he comes over and he's like, hey, guys, my knee's not right. And they go, well, it's spring training, so let's take you out. Let's get you looked at. I don't know which of those two possibilities is the better one. And I haven't seen any coverage related to it. So if that's written in somebody's game story, I apologize. I haven't seen it. But certainly you're going to be cautious and precautionary at this stage of the spring. You just hope that's all it is because knees are tricky ones, right? Especially for a big guy like Jordan Walker. You just don't want to be messing with the knees this early stage of his career. So Cardinals fans, let me know, how worried are you? There's really not a lot to go on, but we'll continue to update you and tell you the fallout of whatever we end up finding out, presumably on Wednesday, when media gets a chance to meet with Oliver Marmol on Wednesday morning down in Jupiter. Those are my thoughts for today. We kind of gave a little bit of a far-reaching conversation to this podcast, but because we're still in the preseason stage, that's still a reasonable thing to be doing as we're sort of setting the scene for the season. And I think Jordan Walker is supposed to be a pretty big part of that scene, and we'll just now have to see if that has to be put on hold or not. Otherwise, the injuries so far in camp, Zach Thompson, we've talked about, out for 3 to 4 weeks. I believe Drew Rahm is also behind the pace, but he was somebody that was not. I think he's even been taken. Is he off the 40-man roster? Because I guess that would end up being kind of notable. Yeah, I think he was off the 40-man. Was kind of quietly taken off and went unclaimed, and so for that situation, there's really nothing to say with that. He's not on the 40-man anyway. But yeah, prior to this point, Cardinals have been moderately healthy. And this is the part of the spring where, some of these injuries do start to pop up. You just hope it's not a freak one in the case of Jordan Walker, where it's just a, kind of a fluke play that happens to him. Like we kind of saw with him colliding with Dylan Carlson toward the very, very end of spring training last year. You just don't want anything like that to be happening. So we'll see. Hopefully it's just everybody holds their breath and he's good to go in a couple of days. But I imagine the Cardinals were going to get whatever deep look at the situation that they needed to determine next steps. So we'll bring you that the next time we do a podcast, I'm sure. Make sure you guys are continuing to subscribe to the various stations of the B-Schaeff Daily Experience on YouTube. We've added a couple of new members, by the way. That's something that I usually like to talk about at the beginning of the podcast, but since I forgot it till the end, I'll still mention you guys. Yes, that's what it was. My friend Jim Smithy has joined the B-Schaeff Daily membership on YouTube. And remember, on the B-Schaeff Daily Lounge tier, there's also a Discord component to that. If you haven't become a member yet and you want to support me in that way, you can do so at the link below. It's in the video description, as is the link to join the Discord, which is completely free if you want to join that. And it's a great place to chat. I know a lot of people right now are like, yeah, I'm kind of not enamored by Twitter anymore. I'm off of Twitter. Well, the Discord can be a great way to be in community with Cardinals fans throughout the season. We also have sections for a lot of other St. Louis area sports, a lot of Mizzou talk in there, St. Louis Blues, fantasy football. There's all kinds of stuff going on in the B-Schaeff Daily Discord, so check that out too below if you're interested. And always DM me at b-schaefer12 on Twitter if you have any questions about anything with it pertaining to the Discord or the YouTube or the Spotify or anything that I'm doing. Appreciate you guys, as always, for supporting the show and for your kind comments on YouTube, and even your comments on YouTube that, you don't really like the direction of the Cardinals. That's okay too. We're going to welcome it all. So thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.